My name's Keith Gillespie and you're watching Stretty News TV.
Hi, Jonathan Schrager here for Stretty News TV. I'm joined by Manchester United alumnus from 93 to 95, Keith Gillespie, who's here tonight for a charity dinner just across the road here at Old Trafford. First of all, Keith, how are we doing?
Yeah, great. Can't complain. A lot older from when I was last here 20 years ago, but still struggling on.
Good man, good man. Okay, I mean, obviously, your career at United, you were at the club during a very special period. You won the FA Youth Cup in '92 with a lot of the class of '92. Can you just tell us about the period when you first came to Manchester as a trainee and then sort of playing with all those great players before breaking into the first team?
Yeah, well, basically, I came over for the first time as a 13-year-old back in 1988, and full time I came over in 1991. So I knew a lot of the lads already from being over those previous years. You know, the lads who were in the sort of '92 Youth Cup team. So coming over in 1991 and as first year apprentices, you know, it's basically most of the time it's a lot of second year apprentices that get in the Youth Cup team, but we were all sort of first year apprentices and made great strides straight away and managed to get into the you know the team for the Youth Cup in that year. So we sort of developed quite quickly. You know, we were all, as I say, first year apprentices, but you know, it was just one of those where we probably were, you know, we didn't realise that we were that good a team at the time, but you know, looking back, you know, we obviously can see what a huge thing it was to be part of that sort of squad.
Yeah, and what are your memories of playing alongside obviously those players that went on to have very decorated careers at United, that, you know, the fellow class members of '92. When you were playing with them at the time, who did you believe at the time would go on to progress to be megastar?
Well, to be fair at the time, I mean, you're still sort of 16, 17 years of age and there's still a lot of development to do. But if you sort of look at the sort of '92 team, you know, Paul Scholes was a lot smaller than most and didn't get into that side. He didn't play in the Youth Cup that year.
Yeah.
But you always felt as if, you know, you knew he was going to get bigger and stronger. I know he didn't get that much bigger, but you know what I mean. But you know, he was one that always sort of stood out. I mean, Giggsy was in that team as well, but had already played first team, so you knew Giggsy was going to be, you know, pretty much as what he turned out to be. But you know, you had people like Nicky Butt, who was probably a lot more. He was probably ahead of most of us in terms of his physique and his sort of way he could get about the pitch. I think he was probably the first to make his league debut from that squad. But you know, it was just full of so many good players. Gary Neville and, you know, as I say, Paul Scholes, David Beckham. You know, you knew what David Beckham was all about with his set pieces and his vision and his crossing ability. Although he was more central midfielder in those days, but you know, it was just looking back, you know, it's great for me on a personal basis to sort of be remembered as being part of that squad with such great players.
And obviously, talking about yourself specifically, I remember growing up and I was around sort of 9 at the time that you were winning that FA Youth Cup. And I remember, you know, always paying attention to the youth team, and my dad would tell me who the young lads were coming through that were promising, and obviously we'd heard of Giggsy and yourself obviously as well. I remember your name and people, you were very highly touted at the time. Obviously with yourself being a young promising Northern Irish winger, I suppose the easy comparison at the time with people to draw parallels between yourself and George Best, is that something that growing up as a youngster, was it something that inspired you, or was it something that was like a burden on your shoulders almost?
No, it definitely wasn't a burden, because I think it's just something that any young kid from Northern Ireland who goes to Man United is going to get. And I think Norman Whiteside had the tag as well when he came to United and then progressed to the first team. But maybe myself, because of we were sort of wingers, you know, there was that comparison, you know, more so. But you know, it certainly wasn't a burden, and you know, it's one of those things where later in my career it became my nickname, Bestie, when I went to Blackburn, and it's sort of something that players, when I see them now, they still call me Bestie. So it's I can think of worse nicknames to be called.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask as well, with the sort of the class of '92 members and what have you, are you still in touch with any of those players at all, even via social media?
At the odd time, with a few social media at times, but I'm still playing these sort of legend type games. We go sort of far afield, nice trips away. South Africa last year, Scholes was there, Ben Thornley was there. You see old players that were first team players when you were sort of apprentices. Like Clayton Blackmore, Lee Martin, Russell Beardsmore, Sharpie, people like that. So that's is sort of close. I mean, you play with so many players over the years.
Yeah.
It's just nice to sort of see them on these trips that we do, because they're great trips and we still see great parts of the world.
Yeah, and we actually did a very brief interview with Paul recently, and I asked a few of the ex-United players who were playing in the charity match about Paul and whether he's still got the magic when he plays in these charity games. Is he still special?
Oh, without a doubt. He just doesn't cease to amaze you. He can still, ping a ball 60 yards straight to your feet, and that's what he done his whole career. He was an incredible player, and he'll undoubtedly go down as one of the greatest, players to pull on a United shirt. I think he's held in so much regard. You'd have him up there with the likes of George Best, Bobby Charlton, Dennis Law, people like that there.
Yeah.
Because he's a one club man as well.
Yeah.
A bit like Giggsy and Gary Neville, and it's great testament to them. To prolong a whole career and be at one club, but it's hard enough. But to do that at a club like the size of Man United is incredible.
Yeah, and obviously then moving on to your time in your appearances for the first team at United. Made your debut in '93 in the FA Cup, I believe, against Bury, and obviously you exited the club in early '95 in January. I was going to say, obviously, at the club at that time, we had, certainly I remember growing up, Andrei Kanchelskis, a great right winger, very much a, how would you say it, a traditional right winger in the sense of hugging the touchline, very quick. And obviously then, of course, you also had David Beckham emerging, who was a right-sided player. Was it difficult for you, and was it partly one of the reasons why you left the club, because you perceived that it was a position that was already kind of exhausted in that regard?
Not really. It was a very quick sort of transfer. I'd gone to a FA Cup game on a Tuesday night at Bramall Lane, Sheffield, and I thought that I had half a chance of actually playing, because there was a bit of a flu bug going about, and Kanchelskis wasn't fit. I'd played the previous week, and it just happened to be Alex Ferguson, pulled me before and mentioned that they were in for this English striker at Newcastle, but the only way the deal would happen would be if I was to go the other way. So he sort of just asked me to think about it and come to him after the game. And the more I sort of thought about it, I think that season probably Andrei Kanchelskis was one of United's best players. So I didn't sort of foresee what was going to happen sort of 6 months down the line, where Andrei Kanchelskis left the club. But I felt as if that I was, a month short of my 20th birthday. I was in and around the first team squad, playing games here and there, but I sort of felt as if it was that time where I needed to be a regular and be playing week in, week out. And I thought Newcastle, a massive club with a a big name manager like Kevin Keegan, and they really wanted me. If I sort of turned the deal down, the deal would never have happened. Randy Cole would never have gone here. So it was just it was one of those where I realised that I needed the first team football on a regular basis, and I thought, it was a great club to do that. So I decided by the end of the game that I would agree to the deal and move on, and spoke to Brian McClare, spoke to Steve Bruce, and they they said it was a great opportunity for me. But as I say, I didn't sort of foresee what was going to happen with Andre 6 months later, and the club, Man United, they did actually try and bring me back 6 months after letting me go. So, but it was never put to me by Newcastle. So I don't feel any badness about that, because I went on to have 4 great years at Newcastle.
Was that a well-known fact? Was it well documented? Because it's not something that I can recall that vividly, that they tried to bring you back.
No, well, it was. I was sat at home, and it was during the summer months, and I had this 016. This before mobile phones. I had an 0161 number, kept calling me for days on the home phone, and no message left. And then one day it rang again, and then all of a sudden the answer machine clicked on, and Alex Ferguson started speaking. So I grabbed the phone quickly, and he put it to me that with the problems with Andre, and I think he mentioned that he was sat and they were thinking, who could they get back, and Brian Kidd happened to mention me, and he hadn't even thought of me.
Yeah.
And he was straight on the phone, but he went to Newcastle, and they turned it down. As I say, they never told me about it, and it didn't bother me. Alex Ferguson said to me, "Would you come back?" And if Alex Ferguson asked you to come back, you're not going to say no. But it was just one of those things that Newcastle were keen to keep me, and I've no bad feelings towards that.
And obviously, so this was in the summer of '95, and in terms of the financials, obviously Andy Cole came to United for 7 million, and you moved the other way for 1 million, I believe, in the deal. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned before, on the premise that you went, that was the only way we made the deal. So, is it something? Was there any monetary terms discussed at the time?
Well, Peter Beardsley, who was very close with Kevin Keegan when he was away on international duty, spoke to Gary Neville and was able to tell Gary that they'd bid 4 million. So my fee had gone up an extra 3 million in the space of 6 months, which wasn't bad. But as I say, that Newcastle turned it down, and it's all ifs and buts now.
Absolutely, yeah. And when you look at, obviously I alluded to it before, the class of '92 and how decorated their careers were. Obviously, you went on to have a long and prestigious career, but in terms of silverware, and obviously comparatively, not quite the same as your fellow members of the class of '92. Is it a source of frustration for you when you look back, or do you just think no regrets in that regard?
No, the only frustration that I have as far as silverware is in terms of the 95-96 season at Newcastle, when we played the sort of style of football for long periods that season where we probably deserved to win the league, but we just fell short, and United went on an unbelievable run and were able to sort of pip us at the post. But it was an incredible season. To go from Newcastle were so close to being relegated to the old third division or second division back in '92, and within sort of 4 years here they were so close to winning the Premiership. So it was a great time to be a part of that Newcastle side, where we had great players like Ferdinand and Ginola, Beardsley, Rob Lee. So we were pretty much, we became known as the entertainers of traditional 4-4-2, with Ginola on one wing, myself on the other, and basically just getting the balls in the box, and as Ferdinand was putting them away. So it was an absolute joy that season. Certainly the best season that I've ever had, in terms of enjoyment, because of the football and the style that we played. And it's something I always say that, somebody turned around and said to me, who came second in the league 2 years ago, I would sort of be struggling to think, but everybody will always remember that Newcastle side. And it's probably because of the way we played football. We became everyone's second favourite team, and obviously Kevin Keegan with his rant at Ellen Road that night, and it was an incredible season, and it was just unfortunate that we came up short. So that would be the only regret as far as silverware.
Yeah, I'll touch upon that in a minute with Kevin Keegan, but before then I just wanted to ask you about a couple of the characters you played with during your time at United. First of all, in terms of obviously the king, Eric Cantona. What are your abiding memories of Eric? He's such a kind of figure of fascination for United fans because he was such a maverick, and obviously some of the antics he got up to as well. I remember Lee Sharp in one of his after dinner speeches saying that he always felt that Sir Alex did give him preferential treatment because he was such a genius.
Yeah.
What was your memory of Cantona in and out the dressing room?
Yeah, well, I mean, Sharpie would be better, obviously, answering that question, because as sort of somebody coming through with the rest of that youth team squad, at the training ground, we were still in sort of the reserve team dressing room, and the big boys were in the first team, and they'd have seen Eric more so than we would, and we'd have just sort of just trained with him. But he was this person who just, as soon as he walked in the room, the presence was there.
Yeah.
That's the way it was. But I mean, it's always been said that Sir Alex did give him preferential treatment because he was such a genius. And looking back, I made my debut in 1993, and to make my debut alongside somebody like Eric Cantona, he happened to pass me the ball, and I happened to cut in and score that night on my debut as a sort of 17-year-old. Was, looking back, as sort of like a bit of a surreal moment, because it was 18 months previous. I was still at school, and here I was, playing in United's first team, and with Eric Cantona passing me the ball and me scoring. So it was just an incredible character. Just one of those people who was always last off the training pitch, because he was always practicing his finishing, and him and the likes of Giggsy and Paul Ince would have been practicing with Brian Kidd, their finishing for a couple of hours after players were long gone.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you as well about Lee Sharp. I mean, I think it's fair to say that he was fond of a drink. I think he kind of had a reputation of enjoying himself and being someone around town and what have you. Was he someone in the squad that when you were in Manchester that you would often go out with?
Well, I mean, I think as far as enjoying a drink, I don't think he was sort of doing anything too much different from anybody who was his age. The difference was he was Lee Sharp and he was playing for Man United.
Yeah.
That's the sort of difference in it all. But I mean, Sharpie would have been out at the right times. I think just the manager just didn't like the fact that the players going out and socialising, especially, Sharpie's a sort of young lad, but he'd always been out. We were sort of apprentices at the time with, barely 25 quid in our pocket to go out. So we'd have been out, and we'd have been in Sharpie's company a lot of the time at the nightclubs and that. But I mean, it was always sort of like a Saturday night, and I mean,
would he have been sorting you out with the Guinnesses then? Would he?
Oh well, I didn't used to drink Guinness that long ago. I mean, it was too rich for me then. But it was just one of those. I mean, if you play on a Saturday, and if at that sort of stage, the team's winning, most weeks. I mean, you don't really see the harm in somebody going out, as a sort of 20-year-old, 21-year-old, whatever Sharpie was at the time, and so I don't feel as if he was doing too much for him. Yeah,
no, absolutely. But it was a very curious period that you were at the club, because obviously, in terms of football generally, you had the advent of the Premier League and all this influx of money and foreign players. At United, you had the massive evolution of the club and the transition and the resurgence of the club with them winning the Premier League for the first time. But also in Manchester culturally, sort of the early 90s, the Hacienda and Manchester, and it was kind of this melting pot with the football team and the culture kind of coinciding. And you were a young lad at that time in Manchester. Do you remember loving the city? Being a footballer in Manchester at that time must have just been immense.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, especially with the club doing well on the field, off the field, when you go out, although I mean I'm sort of a lower scale to the players that you're sort of talking about, but it was certainly felt that way within the club that when you went out, it was a great feeling to be a part of Man United at the time. And it was very difficult, or it was very different to what it is today with as regards social media and camera phones and all that. There, where you were able to do that sort of thing, where it's very difficult for players,
Yeah.
you know, in the modern era to do that sort of thing today.
Yeah, makes me think of that photo of the young Villa player. Is it Grealish or
Yeah,
a lad on holiday? And obviously, like you say, someone's captured the picture and it goes viral, and
I know.
that's that, isn't
I mean,
it?
it's you know, it's very unfortunate. It's, you know, you have people who's going to do this sort of thing, but it's something that players are very wary about now, and
Yeah,
you know, you don't get, you know, it's as I said, it's a different sort of era where you know, you first and foremost you're a footballer, but you're still a human being, and
Yeah.
you still have to have time where you wind down, and if that involves going out for a drink, you know, at the right times, then so be it. You know, you're not doing anything wrong, but it's very difficult for the young players, you know, today.
yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to ask as well. Obviously, Sir Alex, when he first arrived at the club, you know, obviously under Big Ron and everything, it was quite renowned that the booze culture here, and you had the kind of the famous trio with Robbo, Paul McGrath, and Norman Whiteside. It was you know, very well documented at the time. But then Fergie came in and gradually tried to eradicate that. You know, there's still obviously some young lads when you were here, like you mentioned, Lee Sharpie would like to go out at the right times. But did Fergie? I remember growing up in Manchester in the 80s and 90s, and it was kind of this kind of urban myth, whether or not it's true, that Fergie would have a network of spies in and around clubs in Manchester. Did you ever experience anything like that?
Well, I mean, it was pretty much what we heard as well. You know, but you know, I remember on one occasion being out on a Friday night in Manchester, and you know, I wasn't playing the Saturday. The first team squad were playing at home to Liverpool, and I happened to be out and met some friends who were staying at Castlefield, and you know, back to Castlefield afterwards, ordered a couple of drinks, and sort of walking around the corner, and I'd seen Alex Ferguson sitting on one of these sofas and just staring at me. So it was he's, as far as having spies, you know, that night he was the spy himself. So it was one of those sort of, I didn't feel as if I was doing anything wrong. I mean, I was 18 years of age. I was just out with a couple of friends who were over visiting, you know. But Alex Ferguson didn't see it that way on the Monday morning. He called me into the office, and he sort of just said to me, 1 week's wages for telling the truth, 2 weeks wages for lying. And I says, look, boss, to work my drinks. He says 2 weeks wages. You know, so
Right.
but he never. I mean, he was great afterwards. He never held a grudge.
Yeah.
You know, but obviously it was 2 weeks wages down for what I seen as something that I wasn't,
Yeah.
you know, doing much wrong.
Yeah. And what are your abiding? I mean, obviously he's widely regarded as one of the greatest managers of all time, and you know, you played under him and what have you. What are the abiding memories you have of Sir Alex? Obviously, that's one in particular case you've got there, but obviously there'll be positive memories as well. What was it that he imparted on you that was most impressionable for you?
I think, I mean, as a 13-year-old, I came over to sign forms, to sign for the club, and you know, I remember going out for a meal with him and his wife and myself, my mother and father, and just going that little bit extra step, you know, to do stuff like that. You know, he's one of those people who would have known your mum's name, your dad's name, your sister's name.
Yeah.
He'd have known everything about the family.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a great trait to have, and he had that at the club as well, where he knew from the bottom down, or from the bottom up, sorry, everybody's name.
Yeah.
You know, and you think about the amount of people who work at Old Trafford, you know, offices, whatever. He knew everybody's name, and it was incredible, sort of, as I say, trait to have.
Yeah. Yeah. No. A couple of weeks ago, when I interviewed Danny Webber as well. It's funny because that's a recurrent thing that seems to crop up. This characteristic of attention to detail and being very familiar and friendly. And then I wanted to just ask you a couple of questions as well, obviously, about Newcastle, because you played with some real characters there as well. We're talking off camera, obviously, the likes of Ginola, Espria, Ketspire. It must have been a bit of a dressing room full of characters, that.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it was sort of a big influx at that time of sort of foreign players coming in. You know, we had people like Philippe Albert as well. And
yeah, I remember that chip with Schmeichel to make it 5-0, unfortunately.
I think everybody remembers that. You know, we had, you know, people from all nationalities. Pavel Černicek in goals, and
Yeah.
you know, we're sort of, you know, from all over Europe, you know, as far afield as South America, but they were, you know, great characters around the dressing room. You know, Esprilla, you didn't know what he was going to do from one day to the next. He was one of these who sort of just done what he wanted at times, and we'd have had to be in train at 10 o'clock, and Tino would venture in into the dressing room at 10:20.
Yeah.
You know, every morning, and
A law
you know,
unto himself.
Yeah, so one day he actually came in at 9:20, and people were wondering why he was so early, and he hadn't realised the clocks had changed. You know, he was a great character. He's somebody I still speak to now, when I can understand him.
Is he living back in, was it Colombia?
He's back in Colombia, but he ventures back to Newcastle at times, and
Right.
you know, he'll ring me at times, and sometimes I'll know not the answer because at times you just can't understand the word he's saying, so I'll get a barrage of abuse on an answer phone message. But he was somebody that I would have been close to, and you know, that sort of squad that we had around that time at Newcastle was, you know, we were very, very close, both on the pitch and off the pitch, and you know, sort of every 3-4 weeks we'd have gone out as a squad with physios, you know, youth team manager, kit men, everybody would have gone out for a meal and a few drinks, and that was something that, you know, it's very important to have that sort of bond, you know, around the dressing room, and we done that on a regular basis.
And obviously played under Kevin Keegan, who brought you to Newcastle. Sort of, you alluded to it before with the famous rant and what have you in the post-match interview. I'd love it if we beat them and all that. And did you visibly, obviously that was your first full season at Newcastle, and you were vying neck and neck with United for the league right up until the end and what have you. Do you remember seeing the signs manifest themselves of kind of Kevin? Obviously the fans would joke that he was cracking up, but the pressure getting to him in this kind of mind games against Fergie at the time?
Not really. You know, we'd sort of had sort of a bit of a sticky patch. I mean, it wasn't like we were sort of playing badly. You know, you sort of look at the sort of Liverpool game where we lose 4-3, and
one of the
you know,
best Premier League
regarded as
guns of
probably
all
the
time.
best game of the Premier League. You know, era. You know, so we didn't play bad. We went to Blackburn and we were 1-0 up with, you know, less than 5 minutes to go, and we lost 2-1, and it just seemed to be that, you know, the luck wasn't with us at that time. But there was nothing to sort of suggest that he was going to go off on this sort of rant. And you know, looking at the interview, you know, when I see it now, you know, I sort of think back, and I knew nothing about. I hadn't heard anything about Sir Alex, you know, having to go at Leeds, or there was an issue about us playing in a Stuart Pearce testimonial when the season finished, and we still had Forest to play, you know. So those were sort of a couple of the issues that Sir Alex had voiced concern about, and that obviously riled Kevin a bit. But looking back, you know, to that night, you know, the only thing that I'm upset about was because I actually scored the winner that night, and nobody ever remembers because they always remember his rant. But I love the passion that he shows in that interview, because he just wants the best for Newcastle. And he was just black and white through and through. You know, he knew that we were so close to something, you know, where I really think that if Newcastle had won the league that year, they could have become a top 4 side, you know, on a regular basis.
Absolutely.
You know? And it was just all about getting that breakthrough, and you know, it was just disappointing the way that we sort of faded towards the end.
And Alan Shearer was obviously a top striker who was perennially linked with United on a couple of occasions before he moved to Newcastle, and in fact before he moved to Blackburn as well. Is he someone, obviously play with him at Newcastle, is he someone that you believe would have thrived at United?
Oh, he'd have been as good at United as he was at Newcastle, without a doubt. He's that type of player where, scores goals. You just have to look at his sort of record for the amount of Premier League goals that he got. He's a distance clear of anybody else, and that's at a club like Newcastle, where the season he came, he got injured very quickly and never played much of the next season, and then they had a couple of years, maybe one under Sir Bobby Robson, where they got to the Champions League, but other than that, they weren't playing, or they weren't vying for top 4 or top 6 at times, and at times he'd have been playing on the struggling side, and he's still knocking the goals in. So you can imagine if he's playing here at Old Trafford in a successful team who's playing in Europe, Champions League, he'd have scored a lot more goals even still.
I suppose it's one of those, almost possibly you could sort of tenuously see that it interconnects with your career a little bit as well, because I believe we obviously went in for Andy Cole as a result of not getting Shearer, I believe. So potentially you wouldn't have gone to Newcastle had he have come here. You'd have been providing the crosses for Shearer here. It could have materialised like that, couldn't it, boys? 2020 is a beautiful thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
All in hindsight. Yeah, but it's... I was going to ask as well, obviously you played with some great players in your time, and the Shearer question neatly segues onto this as well. Who would have been the all-time 11? Probably put this on you when you probably need a pen and paper. Yeah. The all-time 11 that you've played with during your career.
Yeah, I mean it's always a very difficult question. Despite not playing that many games for United, I've still played alongside some great players, and I think Peter Schmeichel is probably the best goalkeeper to ever play in the Premiership.
Yeah.
I think that's something that everybody would sort of agree to. Gary Neville, without a doubt.
Yeah.
At right back. Philippe Albert, I would have. Was one of the most cultured defenders I've ever seen, with an unbelievable left foot, and just, as you mentioned earlier, everybody remembers that chip over Schmeichel. Gary Pallister, he was probably the worst trainer I've ever seen, but on the pitch he was he very rarely made mistakes. Dennis Irwin would have been in there. Left back, so dependable. Midfield, I would have had probably Keegan and Scholes. On the wing, I would have had Ginola. The right wing was...
Put yourself in there if you want.
No. Definitely not. On the right wing, it's a difficult one, because I was a great fan of Peter Beardsley, and I loved playing with him, and he did play on the right wing at times at Newcastle, and towards the end of that season where we nearly won the league. But I would probably have Peter Beardsley in there, just because he was a genius at times on the pitch. And up front, I would have had Cantona, and I would have had Les Ferdinand, but
I had a Shearer.
Just it's more based on the season where we became so close to win the league, because it was so easy for me as a winger.
Yeah.
Because you just got the ball in the box, and it could be half a yard, whip the ball in, and Les was there, and quite rightfully you got the PFA Player of the Year that year, because he was incredible. I think he got 50 goals in 74 games for Newcastle. Which was a great rate, and disappointed when he left, because he only spent 2 years there.
Yeah.
And he could have went on and scored a lot more goals.
Yeah. And obviously now as well, I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions referring to the book here, obviously your autobiography, How Not to Be a Football Millionaire. Obviously it's been widely acclaimed for being very candid. A lot of people, everyone I've spoke to about it, said it's a cracking read, very, very open. Must read football autobiography. It's how they've phrased it. You were telling me off camera before, when we were having a drink before we came to do the interview, how honest you felt you'd been in it. As a result of that honesty, have you Has there been anyone obviously that's played a part in your football career that you've been honest and they've subsequently called you and said, "Bloody hell, Keith, what have you said that for?"
No, fortunately there hasn't been. You know, I've sort of name called a few managers here and there, so I don't expect them to be phoning me up. But you know, it's something I just set out from the very beginning, where I thought, you know, autobiographies are there to be honest.
Yeah.
You know, so I just wanted to get it warts and all sort of thing. I've read plenty of autobiographies, and you're sort of thinking, is there stuff missing there? And I can guarantee there's nothing missing from that book. And you know, it's something that took 2 years you know, to get the print. You know,
Yeah.
we sort of took our time with it, and wanted it. You only get one shot at writing this autobiography, so we wanted to make sure it was right. And myself and my ghostwriters sat down for hours upon hours. We probably thought it was going to be about 30 hours to actually meet up and talk. And you know, you're talking over maybe 120 hours it took us. You know, so there's a lot of sort of work went into it. But you know, the feedback I've had from it has been nothing but positivity. You know, I was very fortunate to be nominated for Football Book of the Year last year.
Yeah.
I didn't win it, but just to be actually nominated for, you know, a big prestigious award like that was great for me. So I feel as if, you know, I'm very happy with how everything's gone, and as I mentioned, the feedback's just been absolutely tremendous.
Yeah, and obviously one of the kind of the principal lines in it, and the line that obviously is on the back as well, is about how much money you made during your career, but also how much money you lost as well. Do you kind of view yourself as an example to younger footballers? Obviously, you've come up playing football during, like we said, the Premier League years, when there's such an injection of cash into the game, where young players were becoming millionaires as youngsters. Do you kind of view this as an example to maybe younger footballers?
Well, you know, probably without a doubt. I mean, you know, if young players, you know, don't want to follow the same sort of road that I did at times, you know, especially with the sort of gambling side of things, you know, that's a perfect book for them.
Yeah.
You know, to keep them on the straight and narrow. But in saying that, with as regards everything, I'm a very, you know, firm believer in that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, there's no point in sort of dwelling on things. You know, you got to look forward, and as I say, that's why I, you know, chose to write the book. But there's a lot of sort of, you don't, with this sort of book, you don't sort of have to be a sort of football fan with a lot of it. There's a lot of human interest as well.
Yeah.
You know, so it's as I said, it's not just for football fans. And you know, I'm not just saying that because it is my book. I know that it is a good read because it's a very easy read. You know, I've had plenty of, you know, remarks on Twitter how people have read it in a day and a half, have taken it on holiday, and within 2 days they've no book left. You know, so you know, I know myself that it's very well written, and you know, credit to you know, Daniel McDonald from the Irish Independent, who was my ghostwriter on it.
And you mentioned also, obviously, recently you've been getting a lot of requests to do the kind of Q&As and like you said, mentioned you'll probably go on to do after dinner speaking as well. Probably, do you attribute that to obviously people reading the book and realising actually he's got a great narrative and got a lot to tell about from a very storied career?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as my whole career, I mean, there's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs. And there's a story there which people want to hear, you know. So it's something that I've embarked on lately, where I'm doing a lot of sort of Q&As, and as you mentioned, I'm working towards, you know, building that up to doing my own after dinner.
Yeah.
So it's something I've sort of been quite busy with lately, and it's sort of the next chapter in my life, so to speak.
Lovely. And one last question, obviously, Keith, really appreciate the time. Been fascinating talking with you. I wanted to ask about your opinion, obviously, as a right winger. At the club now at the moment, United, there's a lot of right-sided midfield players, shall we say, or wide players that are right-footed that really polarise opinion. And I'll list names, obviously, Angel Di Maria, who's had a very questionable first season at United. You've got Ashley Young, I know he's played on the left, but he is a right-footed player. Valencia, who's been playing right back, but you know, traditionally a right winger. Then the fourth one's eluding me, Nani, who potentially could come back to the club. I mean, you've got 4 right wingers there who, I think if you went round and spoke to everyone in Old Trafford, you'd probably get a mixed opinion on most of them from fans. I mean, who, if you were to say United were to just keep 2 of those players, or who would be the 2 that you prefer out of those 4 to have in the squad?
Well, I think Di Maria, unquestionably, is a great player. I mean, I think he's probably found it a little bit harder than what we would have thought. You know, he started so well, but he's just sort of fallen by the wayside. I think he's unquestionably, a top player, and I think probably next season we'll see the best of him.
Yeah.
I am a big fan of Valencia.
Yeah.
I feel as if 2-3 years ago he was a bit more direct than what he is now. I know he plays right back at times, but I know he had a real bad injury a few years ago, and I just think as if that he sort of lost that directness where he used to just drop the shoulder and be away, and that's the sort of player I always was. It never really had a trick. It was just more pace, and Valencia had that, and it would be great, to see him back playing on the right, and he's got pace to burn, and it's just a case of all he needs to do is drop his shoulder, and he's away. So it would probably be those 2 out of those 4.
Fantastic. Well, obviously, really appreciate the time today, Keith.
Welcome.
We'll be giving away the book signed as well to a Stretty News TV viewer, and we've got a Campo Retro 31 Gillespie 94 home shirt as well. So there's a couple of great prizes there. Obviously, it's been a fascinating interview. And if you can, please subscribe to Stretty News TV and give the video a like as well. And give us a comment, let us know what you think.
My name's Keith Gillespie, and you're watching Stretty News TV.